Some things in history are so weirdly advanced that they just shouldn't exist. So it's not really that shocking that every now and then archaeologists dig up something that leaves them a bit scared, bewildered, or in awe. And a discovery that hits all three is a fabric, a textile that can survive for centuries buried in damp soil, but when it's found, it's still softer and stronger than a lot of the stuff we produce today. But here's the thing, this isn't a product of some modern lab or a high-tech factory. It was engineered hundreds of years ago, long before the Industrial Revolution, by a group you'd never suspect. Their laboratories were rolling hills and windy pastures. Their engineers were shepherds. And their story is a wild one. It's about how generations of anonymous shepherds, through a deep and almost forgotten understanding of the natural world, created a revolutionary material that basically powered civilizations. They were, in a way, masters of genetics and pioneers of a sustainable economy we've almost completely forgotten. This is the story of how they did it, and the lost super fabric they built. The wool economy. When we think of the medieval world, we often picture a time of darkness and stagnation, a brutal, simple era just waiting for the Renaissance to bring the lights back on. But this is a profound misunderstanding. The medieval period was a time of immense, albeit different knowledge, a knowledge based not on abstract science, but on deep, lived experience. And in this world, textiles were the single most important manufactured product, and one fibre reigned supreme: wool. Wool was everywhere. It clothed peasants and kings, made the sails that powered exploration, and formed the sacks that carried goods across continents. Before central heating, wool was your main defence against the cold and damp. The English wool trade was so important, it was called the jewel in the realm, the very backbone of the economy that funded armies and built cathedrals. To this day, the Lord Chancellor of England sits on a literal sack of wool in the House of Lords, a pretty crazy symbol of where the nation's wealth really came from. But not all wool was the same. While most of it was coarse, there was another level to this, a class of wool so fine and durable it was sought after by elites across Europe. This wasn't just wool, it was a feat of engineering, and the engineers were the shepherds. To uncover the secret of their super fabric, we have to enter their world and understand the three pillars of their craft: the animal, the land, and the process. Pillar 1. Genetic engineering. So how did they do it? The first part of the answer begins with a kind of slow, patient biological engineering. Today we picture sheep as these uniform, fluffy white animals. Modern agriculture, driven by quantity, has standardized them. But the medieval world was a tapestry of genetic diversity. The first domesticated sheep, thousands of years ago, were more like hairy goats. It took millennia of careful selective breeding to turn that bristly hair into the spinnable fibre that would change history. The medieval shepherd was a master of this ancient practice. They didn't have textbooks on genetics, but they had something just as powerful: observation. They knew that a particular ram bred with a particular ewe could produce offspring with softer wool. They knew that sheep from a certain valley had a fleece that was more resilient to damp weather. These weren't standardized breeds, they were landrace breeds, animals perfectly adapted to their specific local environment. English wool, for instance, got its reputation as Europe's finest because of the incredible variety of breeds adapted to specific landscapes, from the Welsh Marches to the Cotswolds. A famous example is the merino sheep. Now, its exact origins are still debated, but the leading theory is that it was developed in medieval Spain by crossing local ewes with North African rams to create this unbelievably soft fleece. And the Spanish guarded this genetic jackpot so fiercely that for centuries, selling a merino sheep out of the kingdom was a crime, punishable by death, which is a strong first sign that these people were absolutely metal about their wool. This was a conscious and highly skilled process. The shepherd was a genetic custodian. They'd notice which sheep had the long, strong fibres for tough outer garments, and which had the shorter, softer undercoat for warmer fabrics. After each shearing, the fleece would be sorted, and that information would feed back into their breeding decisions. They were selecting for fineness, length, and something even more important: the fleece's ability to produce a magical substance that was key to its longevity. They were designing a living bioreactor, tuned to its environment. Pillar 2. Mastery of the landscape. If the sheep's genetics were the blueprint, the landscape itself was the raw material. The second pillar was a mastery of the environment so sophisticated it was like a form of natural alchemy. They knew a secret our industrial food systems have mostly forgotten. What an animal eats and how it lives profoundly transforms what it produces. The medieval shepherd didn't just lead their flock to any patch of grass. They practiced a system we'd now call rotational grazing, moving flocks between different pastures with the seasons. This wasn't just to find fresh food, it had multiple benefits. First, it kept the land healthy by preventing overgrazing, and the sheep in turn fertilized the soil. This created a closed-loop regenerative system, a perfect example of what we now call a circular economy. Second, this movement was crucial for the flock's health. Free-roaming sheep were more resilient. A healthier, less stressed sheep produces better wool. Stress hormones can actually make wool fibers brittle and weak. The pastoral lifestyle engineered a superior material just by giving the animal a better life. But move of the flock between pastures had another purpose that was absolutely critical: survival. Because in the hills and forests of medieval Europe lurked a deadly enemy: wolves. The medieval shepherd wasn't just a gentle caretaker, he was an armed guardian. They developed an arsenal of techniques that would make modern military tacticians jealous. First, they bred specialized war dogs. English mastiffs and similar breeds weren't pets, they were weapons. A single well-trained mastiff could kill a wolf in combat. Shepherds would keep packs of these dogs that patrolled the perimeter of the flock at night, creating a mobile defense system. Second, they perfected the art of defensive positioning. Night camps were chosen with military precision, elevated ground with clear sightlines, backs against cliffs or dense hedgerows to limit approach angles. Strategic bonfires weren't just for warmth, they created zones of light that predators feared to cross. Third, they used folding yards, portable enclosures made of woven hazel or willow that could be assembled in minutes. These weren't flimsy barriers, they were sophisticated fortifications that could withstand a wolf pack's assault while keeping hundreds of sheep contained and calm. And they were hunters themselves. The best shepherds could track a wolf for miles, read its territory markers, and set traps that rivaled professional hunters. Some kept detailed mental maps of every wolf den within a day's travel of their usual pastures. Losing sheep to predators wasn't just a financial loss, it was professional failure. Historical records show that the best shepherds maintained survival rates above 95%, an astonishing number considering they operated 24/7 in genuinely wild territory without electric fences, guns or backup. They were running a continuous military operation in hostile terrain, and they were winning. But their knowledge of the landscape went even deeper. They understood the concept of terroir, which we usually associate with wine, but for wool. They knew that sheep grazing on the chalky, mineral-rich hills of southern England would produce a different kind of wool than those in wetter valleys. Different plants and herbs in the diet would directly affect the wool's softness and strength. They were basically curating the flock's diet to fine-tune the final product. A spring pasture might produce a softer fleece, while tougher autumn forage might yield a more robust fibre. This is a level of detail almost entirely lost to our industrialized system, where animal feed is a standardized mush designed for rapid growth. And this knowledge of the landscape extended into something we'd now call veterinary medicine. The medieval shepherd was the flock's doctor, and the pasture was his pharmacy. They knew hundreds of medicinal plants and their precise applications. Tansy for intestinal parasites, wild garlic as a natural antibiotic, wormwood for digestive problems, comfrey for wounds. It healed so fast that broken bones would knit before the skin closed over them, which is why it was also called knit bone. This wasn't mystical folk medicine or superstition. This was empirical pharmacology, tested and refined over centuries. When a sheep showed signs of illness, the shepherd knew exactly which pasture to move it to, transforming the landscape into a living apothecary. Modern research has confirmed that many of these medieval plants contain genuine antiparasitic and antibacterial compounds. The shepherd was practicing evidence-based medicine before the term existed. The shepherd was cultivating an entire ecosystem. They were alchemists of the pasture, turning sunlight, soil and water into a fibre that would become the foundation of their world. Pillar 3. The harvest. The flock was optimized. The land provided the perfect nourishment. Now came the most critical stage, the harvest. This depended on lost techniques for shearing and processing, all designed to protect one secret ingredient, a greasy, waxy substance produced by the sheep's skin we now call lanolin. Before we get to the lanolin, we need to talk about the tools, because the medieval shepherd's toolkit was a masterclass in minimalist engineering. Take the shearing scissors. These weren't just cutting tools. They were precision instruments forged as a single U-shaped piece of steel with no moving parts that could break or fail. The spring tension came from the metal itself. A well-made pair could last decades, being passed down from father to son. The blades were kept sharp enough to glide through fleece, but never so sharp they'd nick the skin. That balance required skill to maintain. Or consider the shepherd's crook, that iconic hooked staff. It wasn't just a symbol or a walking stick. That curve at the top had a precise function. It was designed to catch a sheep by the hind leg without injuring it. The length was calibrated to the terrain. Shorter crooks for steep hillsides where you needed more control, longer ones for flat pastures where you needed more reach. The wood was carefully selected, ash for strength and flexibility, blackthorn for durability. Even the shepherd's bag, the leather satchel they carried, was engineered. It held medicines, marking tools, twine for emergency repairs, and a small knife. Every item had its specific pocket, positioned for quick access. This wasn't random. It was the result of hundreds of years of iterative design, each generation making small improvements. Each tool was built to last generations, and unlike our disposable modern equipment, they were designed to be maintained and repaired indefinitely. The tools themselves were repositories of knowledge. Lanolin is nature's perfect waterproofing and conditioning agent. It coats each fibre, protecting the sheep from rain while keeping its skin from drying out, and it has natural antimicrobial properties. This substance was the key to the super fabric's incredible longevity. While modern industrial processing sees this natural grease as an impurity to be scoured away with harsh chemical detergents, the medieval approach was totally different. They understood this stuff was valuable. Their whole goal was to clean the wool without completely stripping away this natural protectant. It was a feature, not a bug. It began with the shearing. They knew the precise time of year to shear when the fleece had risen, making it easier on both the sheep and the shepherd. The tools were also key. By the Middle Ages, shears were designed for precision, to remove the fleece while minimizing damage and keeping the long fibers intact. Once shorn, the fleece was washed or scoured, but instead of harsh chemical baths, the process was remarkably gentle. They used lukewarm water and mild natural soaps from wood ash or certain plants. Some historical sources even mention using stale urine, whose ammonia content acted as a gentle but effective cleaner, a pretty grim but clever sign of their resourcefulness. The goal was to remove dirt and debris, but leave a fine protective coating of lanolin. After washing, the wool was dried and then carded or combed by hand. Instead of aggressive machines that can break fibers, they used hand tools. For warm, fluffy woolen yarns, they used cards to tease the fibers into a light, airy mass. For strong, smooth worsted yarns, they used long-toothed combs to align only the longest, strongest fibers. Both methods required immense skill and allowed the craftsperson to work with the wool, preserving the integrity of each lanolin-coated fiber. They had harvested not just wool, but wool infused with its own built-in technology. So let's recap the journey. It began with an animal bred over generations for a perfect fleece. That animal was raised on a curated landscape. Its diet managed to imbue the wool with specific qualities. The fleece was then harvested and processed through a series of gentle, manual steps, all designed to protect its most vital component, lanolin. The result of this extraordinary chain of knowledge was the super fabric, a material fundamentally different from the wool we know. First, it was incredibly durable. In some astonishing cases, archaeologists have analyzed wool textiles from medieval sites, some centuries old, and found that traces of the lanolin are still present on the fibers. This waxy coating acted as a shield. It made the fabric water repellent, and more importantly, protected the individual fibers from the inside out, keeping them supple and preventing them from breaking. This lanolin shield also made the fabric resistant to pests like moths. This is why a medieval textile could be passed down through generations, while a modern sweater might show wear in just a few years. Second, it was a high-performance material. The combination of wool's natural insulation and lanolin's water repellency created a fabric that was warm, breathable, and weather-resistant. It was the original performance textile, the Gore-Tex of its day. Third, despite its toughness, it was surprisingly soft. The harsh chemical stripping used today damages the microscopic scales on wool fibers, making them feel scratchy. The gentle traditional methods left these fibers smooth and intact. Plus, lanolin itself is a natural moisturizer. The resulting fabric was just softer and more pleasant to wear. And we don't have to guess. The proof lies buried in the earth. These archaeological finds are time capsules containing the chemical signature of a lost technological system. They are the tangible evidence of the shepherd's genius. The few artisans who have tried to replicate this entire process have found it incredibly challenging. The super fabric was the culmination of an entire worldview that saw the animal, the land, and the textile as interconnected parts of a single, elegant system. The circular economy. This fabric was more than a technical marvel. It was the engine of a sustainable economy. In our modern linear economy, we take resources, make stuff, use it, and throw it away. The medieval wool economy, by contrast, was a series of regenerative loops. The shepherd's wool was the fuel for a thriving local industry. It was sold to spinners, then weavers, then dyers who used natural pigments, and finally merchants who sold it across the world. The money flowed back, sustaining the entire community. The immense wealth it generated is still visible in the grand wool churches built by rich merchants in England. But the cycle was also ecological. The sheep maintained the pastures with their grazing and fertilized the croplands with their manure. In a time before synthetic fertilizers, the flock was an essential part of the agricultural system. And when a sheep was too old for wool, it was used for meat, its skin for parchment, and its bones for tools. Literally nothing was wasted. The economic health of the community was directly tied to the ecological health of the land. The shepherd was a steward of a complex system that generated food, fiber, and fertility. When you compare this to our modern textile industry, with its monocultures, chemical processing, massive carbon footprints, and fast fashion waste, the wisdom of this lost system becomes starkly apparent. They created what many today are desperately trying to rebuild, a circular economy where human prosperity works in harmony with nature. The knowledge system, which all goes to show that you don't end up with a super fabric by accident. But it brings up a further question then. If this system was so ingenious and sustainable, why did we lose it? Before we answer that, we need to understand how all this knowledge was preserved in the first place. Because here's the thing, we're talking about an era when literacy rates among rural workers were basically zero. So how did centuries of accumulated wisdom survive? The answer lies in one of the most effective education systems ever created: total immersion apprenticeship. A boy would begin as a shepherd boy at 7 or 8 years old. His job? Literally follow an experienced shepherd 24 hours a day, for years. He slept in the hills, he ate with the flock, he learned to read the body language of individual sheep, to predict weather from cloud patterns, to navigate by stars when fog rolled in at night. This wasn't classroom learning. It was knowledge transfer through lived experience. The boy absorbed everything, not just techniques, but judgment. When to move the flock, which sheep was about to give birth. The subtle signs that a predator was near. These weren't things you could write in a manual. They had to be felt. By 14 or 15, he'd face his test, left alone with a small flock for the entire summer grazing season in the high pastures. If he brought every sheep back healthy in autumn, he was ready for larger responsibilities. Fail, and you'd repeat the trial next year. By his 20s, a master shepherd could recognize hundreds of individual sheep by the sound of their bleating alone, or by the way they walked. He could estimate a sheep's age by its teeth, diagnose illness from behavior, and predict wool quality by feeling the fleece months before shearing. This level of expertise took decades to develop, and it was passed down through mentorship, not books. The system was brilliant in its efficiency. No formal schools needed, no written texts to preserve. The knowledge lived in human minds and hands, transmitted through the oldest teaching method we have, one generation showing the next, over and over, until it became instinct. But here's the fragile part. This system only worked if the chain remained unbroken. Every master needed an apprentice. Every generation needed to teach the next. Break that chain once, and centuries of accumulated knowledge could vanish in a single lifetime. The unraveling. And that's exactly what happened. The Industrial Revolution brought a new logic: mass production and efficiency at any cost. Hand looms were replaced by steam-powered machines. The gentle art of preserving lanolin was replaced by the brute force of chemical scouring because a uniform, grease-free fibre was easier for the new machines to handle. Speed and volume became the new gods. At the same time, traditional pastures were enclosed, disrupting the shepherd's way of life. The old landrace breeds were replaced by new ones that offered higher yields, even if the quality was different. The integrated knowledge of the shepherd, passed down for generations, was fragmented into 1,000 disconnected pieces. The generational chain of mentorship, that unbroken line stretching back centuries, was severed. When the steam-powered mills offered more money for less work, the shepherd boys stopped following the flocks. When the master shepherds retired or died, their knowledge died with them. It wasn't written down because it couldn't be written down. How do you capture in words the feeling of a fleece ready for shearing, or the instinct that tells you a wolf is watching from the tray line? We didn't just lose a fabric, we lost the worldview that made it possible. We lost living libraries of expertise that took lifetimes to build. Can we get it back? Probably not fully, but their story offers some powerful lessons. It reminds us that technology isn't just about machines. It can be biological and ecological. It teaches us that true sustainability is about designing the entire system to be regenerative from the start. The secret of the super fabric challenges us to look again at the materials we use every day and ask what knowledge was lost in their production. The shepherds who engineered this lost fabric have left behind more than just a few well-preserved scraps of cloth. They've left us a blueprint for a more resilient and connected way of living. Their lost world holds a mirror to our own and asks us to consider what technologies we choose to value and what knowledge we are in danger of forgetting next. And something else which would be odd is if you made it this far without dropping a sub or a like. No special equipment required. We believe there are countless stories like this, hidden in plain sight. What other lost technologies or forgotten systems do you think we should investigate next? Let us know in the comments below. Let us know in the comments below. Let us know in the